Whispers had become Jung Min-ho's constant companions. They followed him through the marble corridors of power, slipped between champagne flutes at charity galas, and echoed in the silence of empty boardrooms. At 39, he commanded an empire that stretched across 3 continents. Tech innovator, venture capitalist, the man whose single investment could transform a struggling startup into a billion-dollar success. His name alone could open doors that remained locked to presidents and princes. Yet power had never bought him the one thing he'd stopped believing he deserved: to be wanted for who he was, not what he possessed. Welcome to Seoul K Diary Besties. Please like and subscribe, because what happens next will leave you stunned the media had labeled him over the years. Seoul's Ice Prince, the untouchable mogul. Those who'd sat across from him in negotiations knew the truth behind the headlines. He was brilliant, uncompromising, and had no patience for empty pleasantries. A man who refused to waste words on politeness when honesty would serve better. And then there was his face. The burns covered the right side, twisting from his temple down to his collarbone in patterns that told the story of the chemical fire that had consumed his family's first manufacturing plant when he was 23. He'd been inside, trying to save the night shift workers. He'd succeeded, dragging out the last person before the roof collapsed. But the flames had taken their payment in flesh. He'd been beautiful once, the kind of young man who'd graced magazine covers, whose smile could sell products and charm investors. The fire changed everything. Not just how strangers looked at him, that inevitable flinch before the mask of professionalism dropped into place, but how he learned to see the world. Every touch became suspect. Every declaration of affection rang hollow. The women who still approached him did so with calculations dancing in their eyes, measuring his bank account against their tolerance for his appearance. Love had become a transaction he refused to participate in anymore. Tonight represented obligation more than pleasure. Richard Hastings, one of the few Americans Min-ho genuinely respected, was celebrating his 55th birthday. Their friendship had survived decades, built on mutual respect forged long before Min-ho's scars and the fortress he'd constructed around himself. The party occupied the entire top floor of a boutique hotel in Seoul's Gangnam district. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city's neon heartbeat, while servers circulated with champagne that cost more per bottle than most people earned in a month. Min-ho arrived precisely 20 minutes late, his custom black suit fitting like armor, his expression discouraging anyone from attempting conversation. He'd planned his evening with military precision. Congratulate Richard, deliver his gift, and escape before the inevitable questions about his personal life began. He was navigating toward the bar when impact came from his left. A small figure had stepped backward directly into his path, and only reflexes honed by years of martial arts training kept them both upright. His hands steadied her shoulders while simultaneously catching the camera that had started to slip from her grasp. "I'm so sorry," she said, turning quickly. "I wasn't paying attention." The apology died on her lips as their eyes met. Min-ho steeled himself for the reaction he knew was coming. The momentary shock, the quick scan of his face, the subtle recoil that people could never quite hide. But it didn't happen. Her gaze didn't skitter away in discomfort. She didn't stare with morbid curiosity or artificial sympathy. She simply looked at him, direct and steady, as though his scarred face was simply a face, no more remarkable than any other in the crowded room. She was beautiful. Rich brown skin that seemed to absorb the amber light and reflect it back as warmth, elegant cheekbones, intelligent eyes that suggested she missed very little. Her hair fell in natural curls past her shoulders, and though she wore simple black that allowed her to move freely through the crowd, she carried herself with unconscious grace. Min-ho found words forming before he decided to speak. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said, and her smile was genuine, lighting up her entire face. "Thank you for the save!" My camera would have been very unhappy with me." He glanced at the professional equipment in her hands. "You're the photographer?" "Freelance," she confirmed. "Covering the party for Mr. Hastings. I was trying to get a shot of the skyline reflection in the windows. Should have looked behind me first." Her voice carried a warmth that seemed out of place in rooms like this, where every word was weighed for advantage. She didn't rush to fill the silence with nervous chatter, didn't perform the elaborate dance of pretending not to notice his scars while obviously avoiding looking at them. And she wasn't impressed. Not by his suit, not by the instinctive way the crowd had parted around them, not by whatever she might have known about who he was. "Jung Min-ho," he said, extending his hand. "Zora Baptiste," she replied, her handshake firm and confident. For a moment, they simply stood there while the party swirled around them. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this particular quality of ease with a stranger, especially a woman. There was no angle in her eyes, no flicker of assessment toward his watch or the cut of his suit. She was simply present, focused on the moment rather than what she might extract from it. "Well, Miss Baptiste," he said finally, "I should let you return to your skyline." "And I should watch where I'm walking," she said with a quick grin before moving away, camera raised. He watched her navigate the crowd, the fluid way she moved, how she seemed to create pockets of comfort wherever she positioned herself. She was working, yes, but there was something more. A groundedness he hadn't encountered in years. A quality of genuine warmth that had nothing to do with what anyone could offer her. The rest of his evening unfolded exactly as planned. Brief conversation with Richard, a single glass of champagne he barely touched, polite acknowledgments to acquaintances. But his attention kept drifting to her, catching glimpses as she crouched for different angles, leaned over railings for better compositions, or spoke briefly with guests. Each time she seemed completely engaged in whatever she was doing, unbothered by the ostentatious display of wealth surrounding her. By the time Min-ho slipped away to his waiting car, he felt unsettled in a way he couldn't quite name. Not because she'd been unkind, quite the opposite, but because she hadn't treated him any differently than she would have treated anyone else. No performance of pity, no careful avoidance, just Zora Baptiste being herself. And somehow that simple authenticity had lodged itself in his mind more firmly than any calculated flirtation he'd endured in the past decade. He told himself it meant nothing, just an unusual encounter in an otherwise forgettable evening. But as his driver navigated Seoul's midnight streets, a thought persisted despite his best efforts to dismiss it. He wanted to see her again. Jung Min-ho didn't chase information about people. In his world, knowledge arrived unbidden, compiled by assistants and analysts who anticipated his needs before he voiced them. Details about competitors, market trends, the hidden leverage points in every negotiation. But 3 days after Richard's party, he found himself calling his friend with studied casualness. "Richard," he said, "the photographer from your birthday. What was her name again?" The pause on the other end carried unmistakable amusement. "Jung Min-ho?" "Are you asking about a woman?" "She was professional," Min-ho replied curtly. "I'm considering her for corporate work." "Right. Her name's Zora Baptiste. American, been in Seoul about 2 years. Does freelance work for expats and international firms. Want me to send you her contact?" "That would be acceptable," Min-ho said. Richard laughed. "Fair warning, my friend. Zora's not like the people in your usual orbit. She doesn't care about your portfolio, and she has this unnerving ability to see straight through pretense." Min-ho didn't respond, but privately he wondered what it might feel like to be truly seen again, scars and all. He waited 5 more days before reaching out, using an upcoming corporate event as justification. Jung Industries was hosting a private function for investors, the perfect excuse to hire her services. His executive assistant, Mrs. Park, raised her eyebrows when he provided Zora's information. "She's not on our usual vendor list, Mrs. Park observed carefully. I'm aware, Min-ho said. Engage her anyway. The night of the function, Min-ho arrived early at the venue, one of his own properties overlooking the Han River. The space was all clean lines and understated luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city's glittering sprawl. Servers moved efficiently through the gathering crowd while a jazz quartet played in the corner. Zora was already there, adjusting her camera settings near the refreshment table. She wore a simple gray dress, her hair pulled back, and she looked entirely absorbed in her preparation. When she noticed him, her face brightened with recognition. Mr. Jung Min-ho, he corrected. Thank you for accepting the assignment. Of course, she replied. This is a beautiful space. The natural light during golden hour must be incredible. He watched her work through the evening, capturing candid moments, positioning herself unobtrusively yet always in exactly the right place. She had a gift for making people relax in front of her lens. No stiff corporate poses, no forced smiles. Even the most camera-shy investors seemed at ease. Midway through the evening, during a quiet moment between presentations, she approached him. Would you mind if I got a few shots of you? The host should be part of the story. He gave her a measured look. You think people want to see my face in their investment materials? I think people want to see the vision behind the company, she said simply. So he allowed it, and as her camera clicked, he noticed she didn't direct him to turn his head or adjust his position to hide the scars. She simply let him stand as he was, her eyes meeting his between frames. When she lowered the camera, she asked quietly, The burns, were they from an accident? No one had asked him directly in over a decade. Most people pretended the scars didn't exist, as though ignoring them might erase the elephant in every room he entered. Yes, he said after a pause. A factory fire. I was 23. She nodded, her expression thoughtful rather than pitying. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was, he admitted, surprised by his own honesty. The physical recovery was challenging, but learning how people change around you afterward, that was harder. I understand, she said softly. Different circumstances, but I get it. Being a black woman in Korea, in this industry, I'm constantly fighting to be taken seriously. People make assumptions before I even open my mouth. About my capabilities, my professionalism, why I'm really here. It's exhausting. For a moment, they stood there in the elegant hum of the function, having a conversation far too real for the setting. He found he didn't want it to end. Over the following weeks, Min-ho created reasons to hire her, photographing new office spaces for press releases, capturing executive portraits that didn't truly need updating, documenting properties that already had extensive visual catalogs. Sometimes they discussed composition and lighting. Sometimes they talked about nothing consequential. And sometimes, when the air between them felt heavy with unspoken things, he'd catch himself smiling in a way that felt foreign after years of practiced neutrality. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was undeniably beautiful. It was her warmth. Her way of making him feel less like Seoul's ice prince and more like a man who might still be worth knowing beneath the armor. His staff noticed the shift first. You seem different lately, Mrs. Park remarked one morning after he arrived at the office, humming under his breath. The quarterly numbers are strong, he replied. But her skeptical expression suggested she knew the numbers had nothing to do with it. The media noticed too. A gossip blog ran a brief item titled, Jung Min-ho spotted smiling, has hell frozen over? He ignored it mostly. One evening, after a long shoot at a waterfront development, the sky opened with the sudden fury of Seoul's summer storms. Rain fell in thick sheets, turning the streets into rivers within minutes. Let me drive you home, Min-ho said as they reached the parking garage. It's fine, Zora replied, glancing at her modest sedan. I'll be okay. I insist, he said, gesturing to his car. She hesitated before accepting. The city lights blurred through rain-streaked windows as his driver navigated the flooded streets. Soft piano music played low in the background. Her apartment was in Itaewon, a modest but well-maintained building in the International District. She invited him up for tea, just until the worst of the storm passes, and he found himself stepping into a space utterly unlike his own minimalist penthouse. Her apartment radiated warmth. Framed photographs covered the walls, some professional work, others clearly personal snapshots. Books were stacked everywhere, plants thrived in every available corner, and the air carried the faint scent of jasmine. "This is welcoming," he said, taking it in. "It's home," she replied with a small smile, handing him a cup of tea. "I need spaces that feel lived in, especially being so far from family." They sat on her worn but comfortable couch, sipping tea while rain drummed against the windows. They laughed about small things, her disastrous attempt to navigate a traditional Korean market with limited language skills, his complete failure at learning to cook anything beyond instant ramyeon. And then, in a quiet moment, their eyes met, and for a heartbeat he considered leaning forward, but he didn't. Instead, he finished his tea, thanked her, and left, the sound of her laughter staying with him long after he'd returned to his empty penthouse. The photograph appeared on a gossip website on a Thursday morning. It wasn't particularly intimate, just Min-ho and Zora standing together outside a gallery opening, his hand lightly resting on her back as they spoke. But the headline was cruel in its bluntness. "Beauty and the Beast, Jung's new trophy." The article was worse. Speculation about her motives, snide commentary about opportunism and strategic social climbing. They'd mined her social media for photos, framing her as someone playing a calculated long game. References to his scars, his wealth, his legendary reclusiveness, all packaged as evidence of an obvious gold-digging scheme. Zora read it once, closed her laptop, and sat in silence. The attention itself didn't shock her. She'd dealt with judgment and assumptions her entire life. But the thought of what this might do to Min-ho, she knew how fiercely he guarded his privacy. She feared this invasion might drive him back behind the walls she'd slowly watched him lower. Her phone stayed silent all day. No calls, no messages from him. Min-ho saw the article before she did. It had been forwarded by 5 different people before he'd even left his morning workout. He didn't click the link immediately. He'd seen variations of this story before, though never about someone he actually cared for. When he finally read it, something shifted in his chest. Not because the insults were new, he'd developed thick skin over the years, but because they dragged her into his spotlight. She hadn't asked to be associated with his world, his baggage, his eternal parade of vultures searching for the next scandalous story. The thought that she might now face mockery or reduction to a headline because of him was unbearable. So he did what he'd always done when emotions threatened to overwhelm his carefully maintained control. He withdrew. 2 days passed, then a week, then 3 weeks. He buried himself in work, convincing himself it was protective, that she'd be better off without his complications, that whatever had been growing between them would only bring her pain she didn't deserve. But the absence echoed louder than any meeting or contract. He missed her. The quiet intelligence in her observations, the way she looked at him without hesitation, the warmth of her small apartment compared to the sterile perfection of his penthouse. One night, alone in his study with an untouched glass of whiskey, he realized he wasn't avoiding her for her sake. He was avoiding her for his own, because wanting her meant risking something he hadn't risked in 15 years, being vulnerable, being known, and potentially being rejected in ways that still haunted his nightmares. And the thought of losing her hurt far more than another vicious headline ever could. It was her birthday when he finally decided. He didn't send flowers through a service. He didn't call ahead. He simply told his driver an address he'd memorized weeks ago. Zora was at home, sketching in her journal when the knock came. She opened the door to find him standing there in a dark coat, rain beginning to fall behind him. Min-ho, she said softly, surprised. What are you doing here? He took a breath, his voice low but steady. I owe you an apology. She stepped aside, closing the door behind him. You disappeared for 3 weeks. No calls, no explanation. I thought maybe you'd decided I wasn't worth the trouble. I thought I was protecting you, he admitted. From the media, from my world, from the complications of being associated with me. Her expression tightened. You thought disappearing would protect me? I didn't know what else to do, he said, the words coming faster now. I've spent 15 years keeping people at a distance because it's easier than letting them close. Easier than discovering they never wanted me, just what I could provide them. Zora's gaze softened, but she didn't move closer. And you think I'm like that? No. His voice was fierce now. That's exactly the problem. You're the first person who's made me feel human in over a decade, Zora. And it terrifies me because if I lose you, I don't think I can survive going back to the way things were before. The silence that followed felt fragile, as though the wrong word might shatter everything. Then she crossed the space between them slowly, deliberately, giving him time to pull away. Min-ho, she said gently, you're not defined by your scars. Not the ones people can see, not the ones you hide inside. I'm not afraid of them. I just need to know you won't run every time you're scared. His throat tightened. I'll try. I swear I'll try. And then she kissed him, tentative at first, then deeper, her hands framing his face as though holding something precious. He kissed her back, years of tension and loneliness, melting like ice in spring sunlight. Months passed and their lives began to weave together in quiet, intentional ways. He brought her to investor dinners and industry galas, not as decoration on his arm, but as someone whose perspective he valued. She introduced him to her world too, friends who cared nothing for his wealth but appreciated his dry humor and unexpected kindness. The media didn't leave them alone, but she learned to ignore the noise, and he learned that the only opinions that mattered were the ones shared in private moments. One evening in early autumn, he asked her to meet him at the hotel where they'd first collided. When she arrived, the rooftop had been transformed. Paper lanterns hung overhead, casting warm golden light across the space. Flowers lined every surface, and a small table for two sat in the center, set with white linens and candles. This is where it started, he said when she joined him. I remember, she replied with a smile. I nearly destroyed my camera. He took her hands, his eyes steady on hers. Zora, I love you. I didn't think I was capable of saying those words again, but they're true. You've changed everything for me. You've made me want to be more than the man I was. Her eyes glistened. And I love you, Min-ho. Scars and all. They kissed under the lantern light, the city sprawling beneath them in rivers of neon and shadow. For once, he didn't feel the weight of being watched or judged. He felt only her, the warmth of her hands, the certainty in her voice. Somewhere far below, the world continued its endless cycle of whispers and speculation, but up here, there was just them. And when he laughed, full and unrestrained and unself-conscious, Zora laughed too, the sound mingling with the distant hum of the city. The man no one wanted had become the man one woman truly loved. The Jung estate had never witnessed such a gathering. The gardens had been transformed into something from a dream. White peonies and cherry blossoms climbed every surface, silk lanterns hung from ancient trees, and a long aisle had been carpeted in pale pink petals. A string orchestra played traditional Korean music reimagined with jazz influences, the sound drifting over a crowd of the world's most powerful and celebrated individuals. Royalty from Korea and abroad, ambassadors representing 4 continents, heads of multinational corporations, entertainment icons in custom couture worth small fortunes. The guest list was so exclusive that international media had been speculating for months, though no cameras were permitted inside. But Jung Min-ho, standing at the end of the aisle in a perfectly tailored white hanbok jacket over black silk, saw none of them. His eyes were fixed on the woman walking toward him. Zora was radiant in a custom gown that merged Korean and Western traditions, white silk embroidered with subtle gold thread, the train flowing behind her like water. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo adorned with delicate gold pins, and she carried a bouquet of white roses and African bird of paradise flowers. But more than the beauty of the dress or flowers, it was the look in her eyes, steady, sure, filled with love, that made his breath catch. When she reached him, he took her hands and held them as though nothing else existed in the universe. The ceremony wove together traditions from both their heritages. They exchanged vows that were raw and personal, promises shaped by everything they'd endured to reach this moment. When Min-ho kissed her, the crowd erupted in applause, and though no press photographers were present, a few discreet flashes from guests' phones lit the air. The reception unfolded on the estate's grand lawn. Guests dined on fusion cuisine that honored both Korean and African American traditions, drank champagne from crystal flutes, and danced beneath strings of lights as the sun set. Min-ho surprised Zora with a private performance by a musician she'd loved since childhood, flown in from New Orleans for the evening. But for all the extravagance, there were moments of intimacy woven throughout. Quiet glances across the table, shared laughter when her veil caught on his cufflink, the way his hand never left hers for more than a moment. The honeymoon took them across the world. They spent a week in the Maldives, waking to sunrises over impossible blue water, their overwater villa a private paradise. Days were slow and sun-warmed, swimming in hidden lagoons, dinners on the beach, conversations that drifted deep into tropical nights. From there, they flew to Paris, where they wandered cobblestone streets and shared coffee in tiny cafes. Min-ho insisted on buying her a vintage Leica from a shop near the Seine, saying, "So you can document everything except me trying to hide in the background." In Santorini, they watched the sun dissolve into the Aegean from a whitewashed terrace, the world below them glowing in gold and rose. Zora rested her head on his shoulder, her fingers intertwined with his, and whispered, "I don't think I've ever been this happy." It was during their last morning in Greece that Zora told him. They'd been lying in bed, gauzy curtains billowing with the island breeze, when she reached for his hand and placed it over her stomach. "I think," she said with a shy smile, "we might be expecting." For a moment he simply stared at her, the words sinking in. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, his voice thick when he murmured, "You've given me everything, Zora. Everything I thought I'd lost forever." There was no child yet, no nursery waiting back home. But there was the promise of a new chapter, one they would write together. Weeks later, back in Seoul, life returned to its rhythm. But everything felt different. Min-ho still commanded boardrooms, still negotiated with the same precision and brilliance. But now there was warmth in his step, a quiet smile that lingered when he thought no one was watching. And in the evenings, when the city's lights glittered against their penthouse windows, he would pour them each a cup of tea, draw her close, and rest his hand protectively over the life they had created. The man no one wanted had become the man one woman loved completely. Husband, soon to be father, and no longer an ice prince at all. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. Your love, subscribe, comments, and shares mean everything to me. Grateful for each of you.